We are live and recording! Yay! Okay, so happy Saturday, everyone. I normally don't do events on Saturday, so I'm super excited because we have not one, but we have two authors joining us today who are staff picks. So, I mean, I literally don't know the last time that happened. So we have Daryl Gregory and Bethany C. Morrow, and I am so excited because for Daryl we have the album of Dr. Morrow, and for Bethany we are celebrating A Chorus Rises, which just came out this week. Yay! And now many of you may know, but Daryl is a staff pick for Spoonbenders. That was one of Gary's favorites. And Bethany, of course, A Song Below Water, which we got to celebrate last year with her, very quickly became a staff pick as well. So I'm so excited that we're getting to celebrate book 2 with you. And I'm going to let them go ahead and talk more about the books and everything. But before I pass it off, the house rules for everyone. To the right-hand side, we have the chat section. Say hello. Hello, Steve. Thank you for saying hello. Make sure you keep those coming. We'll be in the chat section during the event. I'm talking to you guys. And if you look down below, there will be a beautiful magical button that says Ask a Question. As that would imply, that is indeed where you can ask a question. I highly recommend you take advantage of that. Events are fun because you get to pry the brain of the author. So make sure you ask whatever questions you've got. And then also you may be wondering, do I want the sequel to A Song Below Water, a fabulously amazing magical book? Why, yes, indeed I do. Or, do I want a book that celebrates a boy band that is mashed up with animals and there's a mystery and all these cool things going on as well? You're like, indeed, I do wish to purchase these items. And if you would, there will be a purchase book button down below that has these books, as well as you'll be getting book plates with them. So on that note, I'm going to pass it off to Bethany and Daryl. You guys are in for such a treat. Also, be prepared. Planet of the Apes Battle Royale potentially may be happening at some point. And on that note, I will see you guys at the end of the event. Goodbye.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Hi, Bethany.
So I came prepared, as you can all see. I don't know who picked out Daryl's outfit, but
I got nothing. I got nothing.
Promises were kept. Here it is.
That's a seriously good Zero Cornelius. And who's
gorgeous? It is my favorite. It is my favorite Planet of the Apes picture. It is gorgeous. We are going to talk about our books first, only because that's the only way to make sure it actually happens.
And to make our publishers happy. We're supposed to be selling books to people. Instead, we'll probably, we'll get derailed into many tangents before we get done with this thing.
Looking forward to it. So I'm going to introduce A Chorus Rises. And then you can introduce the album of Dr. Morrow. So for everybody who doesn't know, A Chorus Rises is the follow-up to A Song Below Water, which also came out in paperback on June 1st. And I still maintain that for me, I do not think of this as a sequel. I know that it follows the events. It actually starts with one of the events of A Song Below Water. And I know that there are going to be people in two very different camps. Some people are like, you have to read A Song Below Water before you can read it. And there have been other people who said that it worked fine for them. So it just depends on what kind of reader you are. I should stop telling people that they don't have to, because clearly that's not true for everyone. But A Chorus Rises follows Naima, who was the Iloko sort of queen bee in A Song Below Water. I will say that the reason that this was written is because people kept describing her as the antagonist of A Song Below Water, which isn't possible because she's a 16-year-old Black girl. And the first book was about anti-Blackness, misogynoir, white supremacy. So obviously she can't be the villain. They did not get along, though. They were not friends. I will give you that. So this book is about the fallout a year after the events of the first book, when Tavia has done something that I won't spoil, I guess. And now all of Portland loves her and she's being celebrated. And as that's happening, Naima's star is falling, and it's an experience that she has never had as a loco, and especially as a proud loco. And it's basically about figuring out that the world can change their mind about you, especially if you are a Black girl, and what it means when you're not willing to grovel or do an apology tour or say that you did something that you didn't do. So it is very much the unapologetic girl who loves herself, who doesn't stop loving herself, but also really comes face to face with a lot of the toxicity in the world and has to figure out what, if anything, being a loco actually means to her. Daryl.
And you should definitely, I would say, you definitely do need to buy A Song Below Water because you need to support your writers. And it's a good book. So why would you deny yourself that? Do not just give in and think you can just buy one book from us. You have to.
That's my bad.
Your job here, people, is to buy all the books.
Of course you need books. What was
right? Because we're all starving. So I'm just here to talk to Bethany, and our publicist put it together because we're like, here, you guys both love Planet of the Apes, and you both have books out, and so why don't you talk to each other? And then we didn't have any other plans besides that. And so, Bethany's holding the new book that came out May 18th, the album of Dr. Morrow, which is a ridiculous book that shouldn't exist. I sort of
picked it way though, like in the best way, a ridiculous, absolutely ludicrous book. That's amazing.
Yeah, my favorite review so far was just 2 words: completely banana pants, and I'm counting banana pants.
Yeah, I like it.
It's so it's only the second novella I've written. I've written a bunch of other books, but I love novellas, and so this one is about. I pitched it to my editor saying, "Well, what if H.G. Wells and Agatha Christie did a lot of cocaine while watching This Is Spinal Tap, and then this is the book they would write together."
That's so perfect.
So it's about a genetically engineered animal-human hybrid creatures who are discovered after being rescued from a evil science barge somewhere near the equator. And of course, they do the only thing that you can do in that situation is become a boy band. And they become almost as big as the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. And Bethany and I will also fight about Backstreet Boys and
Yes,
NSYNC.
We won't fight about it. There's nothing to fight about. Backstreet Boys forever. And Backstreet Boys are mentioned in this book if you needed more incentive to buy it. They do talk about Backstreet Boys.
Oh, yeah. Not semi-disparagingly because they're in competition with the Backstreet Boys, of course. But it's also a locked room murder mystery. So the boys are in the last concert of their big tour, and their manager is found clawed to death in bed. And of course, because it's claws, the boys are the automatic suspect. So the boys in the band are the Wild Boys, and they're wildly popular in 2001 when this is set. And our detective, Luz Delgado, has less than 24 hours to solve the crime before the feds, in the form of the Fish and Wildlife Service, come and take the case out of her hands. But it's so you don't have to read, like I will say, like Bethany said, you don't have to read the prequel to my book, which is The Island of Dr. Morrow. I'm just going to claim the 120-year-old classic of my prequel.
What I love is that book exists in the world of your book as something that was basically like an unauthorized.
Yeah, Wells ripped off one of my characters to write that story, and so they're so mad at
I love it. I love it.
Wells. So you can see how similar the audience can see how similar these two books are. They seem like mirror images of each other.
Yeah, I mean, we've both been very much in conversation with each other. One, speculative novella for the adult market, and a contemporary fantasy young adult. So just very, very much. But there are a couple of overlaps, which we did establish just yesterday, which is which is dealing with fame and popularity and the uses of it and the downsides of it. Because obviously in A Chorus Rises, more so in A Song Below Water, but you don't really see it because it's not from Naima's perspective. But in A Chorus Rises, you find that there is an entire social media app and platform that was created to love and adore Aloko. And Naima was like the biggest name on that platform. She was the most popular Aloko. And that's what she has been accustomed to, is this just constant influencer fame, just as she goes about her everyday life. And there's, the stuff that she goes through in this book begins with that being taken away from her. So she posted some footage from prom. If you've read A Song Below Water, you know what happens at prom. A lot of people are turned to stone, including Naima. And before she was stoned, she posted all of that to in a live stream to Love, which is what they call Aloko Verified. And so when she comes out of the gray, not only has she been suspended in this nowhere place where she couldn't even, she had no body. So she was basically just a consciousness in gray, and she couldn't even hear her Aloko melody, which is something that famously everyone loves about Aloko. So she comes out of that space after 6 hours to find that she's actually been, what's that thing called? Suspended, which I can't believe has never happened to me on Twitter. But she finds out that she was suspended from Love, and that really begins, that's world shattering enough for her, for somebody who has constantly been in the limelight and constantly been popular and constantly been beloved. And she's also, 17. But that's enough of a shock to the system to really start this entire process, because how could this happen? What does this mean that this could happen? If this can be taken away from me, if my fame and popularity can be displaced, then who am I? Because as far as her experience in Portland, that's kind of all being Aloko has been. It's just been this experience of fame and popularity. Your characters used it for hoped that it would serve a very particular purpose in the album of Dr. Morrow.
Yeah, my boys, they're using fame and money as sort of a protection, because they actually get smuggled into the country as property, as basically under an exotic animal license, and their status as sentient persons is undetermined through most of the book, and they're never sure when the hammer's going to come down and they're going to be declared non-person. And so their one defense is, well, if we use our fame, they can't really come after the famous people, can they? But of course they can. I mean, that's the problem, is that fame is really a temporary protection at any point. And I think this is what A Chorus Rises does really well. It just shows how the world can turn, the internet can turn on you on a dime, and so you can't depend on that. So the Wild Boys and the story of their origins, they're keeping a lot of things hidden, but they know they have to do something to ensure their safety in the future, especially for their children to come. And there's so I was really interested in this idea of you can be famous and that'll help you, but it won't protect you completely.
It won't help forever. Yeah. And there's also the aspect that in both of our books, the people who are sort of depending on this fame are otherwise marginalized, and they understand that the fame is their privilege. The fame is sort of their only privilege. We haven't talked about your characters, and you will not understand how ludicrous this book is if we don't introduce the band. So there's 5 boys in this band, and the thing is that you're thinking so they're humanoid, with a couple of features, and it's no, they look like animals. They're
full-on animal people,
right?
So are you gonna do it? Oh, you can do it with the cover. All right.
Yeah. So there's Tess. No, I had to at the beginning of the book. I was even as somebody who followed boy bands and knows each of the personalities or whatever, because these are also animal people, I was how am I going to remember who is who? And then thankfully That's when I figured out what these pictures were. So there's
and I would tell people, take your copy, and as you get a character name, write it in across their face on the cover.
Don't do
and that will be Don't do
that. Then there's Devin, right? And Tim, yes?
Tim the pangolin.
Right. And then Bobby, of course.
Bobby, the ocelot we love a lot. He's an ocelot.
Matt, the bat. You know what just occurred to me is what we should do, just to make up for any of the negative things that you said about Backstreet Boys, is determine who is who if this were the Backstreet Boys. Because I would say that I think we would all agree that Bobby, who is the adorable young knight,
the cute one.
That's Nick, obviously. Clearly.
I'm writing this down as the official.
Yes.
Next time we get this question, how do they map onto the Backstreet Boys?
So Bobby is Nick. Tusk has to be. This is hard. Okay, I think Tusk has to be Howie based on age, but I feel like he's more of a Kevin. This is so difficult. I wish that you guys had all read this already so you could give me some help. All that really matters is who is AJ. And I think that we can all agree that that would be Devin, 100%. When you have read this book and you read about Devin, come and confirm for me if you feel like he is, you feel like he's AJ. He's popular. Let's put it that way.
Well, I love bonobos. One, they have a great name for comedy. And two, any species that uses genital rubbing as like an icebreaker, as part of their society, okay,
right.
He's built to be in a boy band. There were so many.
I'm serious. I want to know after you read it.
Oh, when I was working through this novel, there were so many versions of this that could have been. I was reading all about the behind the scenes stuff about what was happening with these boy bands. And I was like, this could have been so much filthier of a book. And I toned it down.
Could have been darker than the one murder that we, the gruesome, very gory graphic murder that we have in the book. So another overlap that I found for me, just thinking about it, is one of my favorite characters in A Chorus Rises is Courtney, Naima's cousin. And
Dreamboat.
Dreamboat, super adorable. His style is he looks like he absolutely was in a boy band. Maybe B2K though. Maybe he would have been with Omarion and them. But I feel like he's not a himbo like Bobby. He's not a himbo like Bobby, but I feel like he also is somewhere between Bobby and Devin. So I just thinking about who would get along between our books.
Right. Well, I loved in your book, I love the introduction to Courtney because he plays as such a counterpoint to Naomi. He's like a settling influence. He's got a commentary. Every time she gets overblown and over dramatic, he's like, let's just I really like that. There's so much good things about family that in both books, but I really love it. You really sense it in Chorus Rises because she goes from Naomi goes from being kind of a solo force of nature. She has a boyfriend, but it's when she gets out of Portland and gets among her extended family, she just seems to open up as a person. She lets go a lot of things that she's holding on to. And I was glad that you didn't have her get suddenly different in personality. She's still totally herself.
She is. She's going to be Naima till the day she dies. There was no, and that's why I push back a lot on what I'm finding though, and I won't go into how I feel about redemption arcs completely because that's what I did at the last event. If you haven't watched that, you definitely should. But one of the things that I realized, because people keep saying it, despite the fact that it's not in the book, you don't see a redemption arc, total turnaround from her, is redemption arcs must therefore sort of be reader imposed sometimes, because it's if that's what you want, apparently you can sort of read things that way. I just found it really, really interesting because the whole point of writing the book for me was that she didn't need to change. She already wasn't who you said she was. And so there was no reason to write her wildly different. It's literally just the difference between seeing somebody among kinfolk and seeing someone when they've actually been somewhat isolated from reality by their fandom and by their fame. So it's the same person, but in two extremely different contexts. And you would expect to see someone behave differently when they're with their family. But the great thing about having Courtney there, I feel like, is he's the person who she can kind of be the same person with, like the person that she was in Portland. And, you know, and then we can kind of see through him, she can kind of see like, this is how people feel about that, or this is how it sounds to people who are not from that bubble, like who are not accustomed to that bubble that you're accustomed to. So I definitely made no attempt and would not have made any attempt to change her because I loved her in the first book. She just wasn't Tavia. She just wasn't Effie. And
well, and she's not, I mean, you embrace some of the really, she's not that likable, especially in the beginning of, you know, like you said, people reacted. She wasn't that likable in the first book. And then you take a long time because you totally show all of the self-involvement that if you come out of that ultra fame environment. And my daughter is friends with a lot of influencers, and they're kind of relentless in that they're always looking for content. And so sometimes you're not even sure if you're ever present with this person because every meal, and my daughter is a nutritionist, and some of these food and nutrition influencers, like you can't have a meal with them because everything's being Instagrammed instantly,
right?
Or being hashtagged. Like, can we just have a conversation
in real time?
Like,
no. Right. Yeah, and I wanted to, you know, I also wanted to push back from a very particularly Black female perspective of likable, right? Because when you say strong, I was just on a panel about strong women and how did feminism inform the way that you wrote your story? And I was like, we could talk about that for A Song Below Water, but then we'd have to talk about the fact that so many people came after another female character who, by definition of what we're all talking about are great, strong characters, is Naima. But for some reason on her, that strength and that, you know, she is very convinced that she is dope. She is very, very proud of herself. She's very pleased with her appearance. She's very pleased with the way that she, you know, just linguistically dominates. And so I'm like, it's interesting because her character has been described as unlikable pretty much consistently. And I don't even push back on that because I'm like, if that's unlikable to you, like, that's fine. But we have to comparatively look at what that means when this is the strength that we're taught to, you know, lionize when the woman is not Black. Like her having something to say right after you say something, her being very self-confident, all of that kind of stuff suddenly makes Naima unlikable. But if you just write those traits down on paper, it's like, oh yes, so proud of you, lean in. So I'm like, clearly feminism is not talking about all of us. It's not coded for all of us. And Naima also, you know, I don't adultify my teen Black girls because that's a crime that we have to experience in real life. And so I don't make her a sociology professor, and I don't make her able to, like, you know, speak to that, always have the language to speak to that. But I definitely make it where she figures out, okay, I'm not allowed to be like this. You're allowed to be like this. It's just me. Like, I'm just not supposed to be this way. Because we do meet other Aloco women, particularly one by the name of Leona Fowle, which will continue to be one of my favorite names because it sounds like somebody from Portland, and she's not from Portland in the book, actually. She's from LA. But you see, you know, her own friends in her own friend group. You see people like Gavin and the way that he acts, and he's extremely popular. Everybody loves him, you know, and it's like, what could it be? Why is it not acceptable for Naima? Really makes you think.
Right. But people do love Effie and Tubby.
Yes.
Love those.
Yes, they
I
love
think and part of it is the way narrative works, and that in the first book you're inside the heads of those sisters, and you see how much they're struggling and how much.
That's the key right there, though. You see how much they're struggling. That's endearing for Black women. That's endearing, right? Like, let us watch you struggle. Then I'll feel good about liking you. Naima doesn't.
I think that's true. Isn't that true about everyone? Like, if someone is like, I'm really interested in stories where where a character doesn't struggle at all. Like, I see, even in Chorus Rises, I see Naima struggling. Like, she's under pressure trying to figure things out. I like that.
But the expression of struggle, we could always say, like, oh, of course, everybody goes through certain things, but there's socio-historical context that is not the same for everybody. So there's an expression of struggling that makes you palatable as a marginalized person versus Naima is struggling, right? But she's not performing struggling. She's not, if anything, she's like, you will never see me break. Like, you will never see certain things happen.
But what I like when I said seeing them struggle, like, you mean we're inside their heads. We're experiencing what they're experiencing. And, a character who's only told from the third person is harder to empathize with, which is why the second book, where we get inside Naima's head, it's like, oh, this is what's been going on. Like, this really sort of impenetrable surface where she seems to have everything totally together. And then you see what's really going on behind her head behind her eyes is great. I mean, and so it's the way narrative works. We're like, oh, we're on the inside now. We can see it gets a lot more complex, and it's just more interesting.
It is, and that's complex from the narrative side. There's the complexity coming from the consumption side too. That that dictates why the response is different for some people. We're having a great conversation, but I'm watching the clock, and I just want to make sure that we're going to get to the apes. So if there's no, because I know we had a couple of other. Did we have a couple of other things that we wanted to talk about our overlap?
No, I mean we had a brief thing. We're going to talk about fandom shows up in both things.
Oh, okay. No, I really do want to talk about that, especially in terms of the album of Dr. Morrow. Do you want to talk about your fandom?
Yeah, we'll briefly talk about fandom. So for the Wild Boys, their fan group, the Zoomies, they are the super fans. Also like to dress up in fursuits and hold parties at cons and go to the concerts and hold fan base parties. And so they have a subculture. They are really they make it clear that they are not furries. They are a separate subculture. But there's obviously a lot of overlap, to the point where my publisher said, let's make sure we have someone from the furry community be a sensitivity reader for this. But the furry community has been part of science fiction, since the beginning, especially the larger cons. All fandom sort of shows up to Worldcon and to the larger cons. And I was telling Bethany yesterday, like, I've been to cons that are more specifically focused on furries. Like, I was at one that was the furry con and the steampunk con were sharing the same hotel. And it was like, I'd never been to a place where the costumes were so fabulous, like everywhere. Like everybody was tricked out. So, one of the things they did in the book was there's 5 rules of detective fiction. And T.S. Eliot said one of the things you can't have in a detective story, to be a good detective story, is a reliance on elaborate disguises and costumes. And I'm like, well, there's going to be an elaborate disguise.
Right, yeah.
So somebody dresses up as one of the Zoomies to help carry out the murder of Dr. M. But the Zoomies are like, that's not one of us. Look how badly that costume is made. They're obviously faking it. Right. They're not one of us. Somebody is trying to frame us.
It was so, because that identity and that fandom, has an element of identity to it, that it was, you don't have to worry too much about like, oh, is this going to feel insensitive? Because immediately it's like, this is not a Zoomie because this is a store-bought outfit. And it's like the first very like, it's like, this is, you don't even have to be a detective at this point. Like, this is a store-bought outfit.
Right.
None of us would be caught dead. Like
my sensitivity reader said, this is the kind of conversations we have all the time. Like, so like, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so that was really interesting right off the bat. And I wish we could talk more about the murder.
Well, let's talk briefly about Chorus Rises. Like, one thing that's an important, plot point in A Chorus Rises is this fandom that arises about Locus in general, but also about Naima in particular, and a weird kind of subreddit kind of forum following her. And you want to talk about that? Like, what were you thinking of, like, especially this, I don't know how much you want to say about what she discovers about them. We don't want to give too many spoilers, but do you want to talk about her fandom?
Yeah, this fandom, so something arises, especially after, like I said, she used to be a big shot on Love. She had a huge following on Love, and then they suspended her. And while there were plenty of people still on that platform who are really, really upset about it, you also clearly see some people changing their allegiances, because this is an influencer that has fallen out of favor, and so they're sort of bandwagoning and kind of going against her. And so another group arises called the Knights of Naima that wants to create a space that is entirely loyal to Naima. And it's interesting because my starting point, the genesis point for A Song Below Water, was literally being online and watching right-wing and just a bunch of racist people dogpile and abuse a Black woman online. At this point on Twitter. I was watching it happen on Twitter that time. But it has happened to me since then. It had literally happened to me the month that book came out, where there was a lot of irresponsible, quote unquote, reporting of something that cast me in a narrative that I was never even in. Even if I had been, it wouldn't justify anything. But that gets screenshot and sent to Reddit, and that gets screenshot and was put on Parlay, and that got screenshot and was put. And so what you end up having is like all of these people who are not usually from Twitter just completely dogpiling and sending me violent messages on all of my platforms and everything. And so that experience, which is a very normal experience of social media and forums for Black women, especially for women in general, but there's something very specific, of course, about misogynoir, and that's what I was talking about. In this book, and especially coming from the perspective of her being an influencer and having had all of this rabid fandom, to take a line from Detective Banks, I then wanted to show another side of what happens in these spaces, the like in real time radicalization of white men, and which is what this forum primarily was. It was a bunch of white men who were like, we are pro Naima and she's a loco first and we really love her and we want to defend her. And then we sort of watch quickly what that becomes. There's one exchange in particular where there's a really artistic, like soft-spoken guy who mainly on Knights of Naima just shows his artwork, and she's sort of his muse. And then just in a matter of one single exchange, he becomes convinced of something that she'd be like, hold on now. That just feels like a leap. Like, that feels pretty extreme. And it too was something that is very verifiable and very observable. And I didn't need to get a radicalized white guy sensitivity reader, mostly because they're not secret about any of this. Like, they're not quiet about any of this. You can go watch this happen in real time. I'm on certain subreddits, one in particular, of course, being Planet of the Apes. But you see things happen that you're like, how did this turn into a super hateful, bigoted conversation in this thread that started out being about the thing that I'm a fan of, and like started out being about this thing that I thought we all wanted to share our love of, and just how quickly that devolves. So that's kind of all I can say about her fandom. But yeah, I did think it was interesting that we both there is a violent there's an insinuation or reference, at least, to the potential violence that sometimes you see and experience crop up in these fandoms. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about that, but that's been my experience in every fandom. And it's, there are certain people that I read a lot of their scholarship on it, because it is so often toxic for very particular groups. And I feel like it's observable. Nobody should have to we shouldn't have to make this point over and over, because you can just watch it happen. So I thought it was really interesting that both of our books sort of showed a potential downside or harmful aspect of what can happen in these very, very intense settings.
Yeah, and I wasn't addressing, I was actually more concerned about showing that,
right?
Look, just because fandom has a bad reputation, and mainstream press is always making fun of the furries and saying, all these sexual deviants who dress up.
Right.
I was more interested in saying, look, I like these people. And
it's clearly not them and yours, which is which is a relief as soon as you see it, because you're like, oh, is this going to be sort of the easy right, point to this group that already has this sort of stigma attached to them. And it's great because it's just so quickly settled on the basis of it being a store-bought costume.
Should we? Okay, so it's 20 till. We have some questions.
Should we do the questions?
We want to quickly do Planet of the Apes. We're going to end with Planet of the Apes.
Okay, well, let's quickly do Planet of the Apes, because
all right, let's quickly do Planet of the Apes. All right.
Because something will stop us. Okay, so the first thing that I want everybody to know before Daryl says anything wrong and untrue and false is that the first 5 films is what we're going to largely be talking about. We're talking about the first 5 in the original franchise, which is Planet of the Apes, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, Conquest for the Planet of the Apes, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes, right? So he wrote a comic book series that takes place, and I think that there's no arguing this, that takes place after the events, almost immediately after the last scene of the 5th movie.
Yeah, pretty much in that around 2600 AD, right?
So,
because people have to know that the last movie catapult, they have sort of a framing story. It catapults into the future where humans and apes are living together. It seems to negate the Charlton Heston movie that comes later, but it does not. So
it does. It absolutely does. And so the thing is that
make your point. But
the last 3 movies. So here's what happens. Charlton Heston goes through whatever, the wormhole or tear or something, and ends up on this Planet of the Apes, which of course, spoiler, you guys, it's Earth. Okay. So then the second movie picks up immediately after that with a second astronaut coming to the exact same place. Whatever. We won't even deal with that.
Yeah, it was Charlton Heston Light shows up, a second
guy.
Right.
Charlton Heston Light, who is way better, by the way. And then, of course, spoiler, Charlton Heston destroys the Earth because, never trust anyone over 30. So then we find in the 3rd movie that Zira and Cornelius, okay, so this is Cornelius and this is Zira, took the second astronaut's shuttle back the opposite direction and ended up in 1970s Los Angeles.
Yes.
So here is the thing. Once they do that and they give birth to a far future speaking intelligent ape named Caesar in 1970s Los Angeles. And before they give birth, they have this whole scene where Cornelius dictates the evolutionary situation that led to the Planet of the Apes. And it's hundreds of years. He himself is giving testimony, and it's 100 years till this happened, 100 years till this happened, 100 years till that happened. Then they give birth to a far future ape, but he's the only one, okay? And then in the next movie, number 4, the revolution happens literally 20 years later.
20 years later, yeah. In the future of the 1990s. Yeah.
The future, the 1990s are super futuristic. It all takes place on one terrace in Los Angeles. It's amazing. It's a triumph. But there's no way that we can be expected to think that we are following the same history as from the first two movies. So we're on a completely
I will explain that to you. I will explain that to you.
You know, we've talked just really clearly.
No,
before, and he did not have an answer. We talked about this before. He didn't have an answer. So now he's gone off and fabricated information that he's now going to try to introduce. Go ahead.
Here's the thing that's left out, which is my big theory when I pitched it to these editors was like that when Cornelius and Zero go back in time, they bring the virus that uplifted apes and killed the cats and dogs and muted the humans. It's all the same virus. So they brought it back to that timeline.
Where do we see that? Where do we see evidence of that?
Oh, this is my backstory. Like nobody knows it.
Wait a minute. So this is headcanon. This is not in the movies. So this is not in the movies. We don't ever get.
No, this is not in the movie. All the movies tell you is that the look. I wrote the book, so I get to decide. It's
a faulty premise. It's an amazing book, and it's a faulty premise.
And Paramount, they approved the movies. They approved it. Their minds were so much on the new movies. They approved all my storyline.
Oh my god!
So they go back in time. The virus that famously kills cats and dogs also uplifts apes, which explains how apes go in 20 years to being able to speak and reason and be servants in ways that they can't now.
No, that's my point. They can't speak 20 years later.
But they're standing upright. They're twice the size of normal apes, and they can do lots of tasks, and they're all trainable.
It's just bad movie making. There's There's
no bad movie making. Let me finish. See, if you love the series, you have to say, okay, so yes, there's maybe some humans made some bad choices, but let's just treat this as if they really bent all this. So my point is that the virus spreads, the apes all of a sudden transform and become trainable. Humans start to grow mute, and in my book, we're at the point where more and more humans are growing mute. The apes and humans are living together around the time of the lawgiver, but there's 1,500 years between the lawgiver and Charlton Heston landing, and that's where everything falls apart, and we're back to where Charlton Heston is. So therefore, it's a complete solid loop.
It's totally not. Nothing he just said makes sense, you guys, and he's literally banking on the fact that you're not going to know that. So in the fourth movie, Virgil, right? Or is it the fifth movie? It's either the fourth or the fifth movie. And Virgil.
Are you going to bring up Aldo again?
First of all, that I don't even have to because you already know. You already know that proves.
No, because I know that
it does. But here's what I'm talking about.
Main point is that the
That's not my main point. It's just a really good
all
point.
Correct. And that religious documents, even written hundreds and thousands of years after the point, are going to be accurate.
No, that's not what it is. It's literally the fact that even in making the movies, they knew that they had to explain why this world happened at a different evolutionary rate than the original, which, by the way, they give no indication of this virus that he's talking about. There is no virus in the first franchise.
No, because they...
Now you're going to tell me why there's not? Okay, so Virgil, the orangutan, talks about, and he explains to Caesar himself, he's talking literally to Caesar about the fact that all of these different lanes of time exist, and here's how we, even though your parents came from this lane, once they came back, he literally says this in the movie. How are you going to say this isn't the case? Virgil literally says, when your parents went back and you were born into the 1970s, they started a new lane of time. He says that. So you're like totally going to throw out what is actually canon.
Here's why.
To make up a virus that does not exist in the first franchise.
It explains how the apes evolved in 20 years to be upright and trainable.
That's the whole point. If you watch number four, and because this is the first time you see Caesar as an adult, and he starts the revolution on that one terrace in Los Angeles, in the downtown mall, Planet of the Apes, he literally makes eye contact with apes, and then they have a zoom close up, and then it's like they got it. That's the whole explanation of like how he radicalizes the rest of these apes are extreme close-ups. And
you're right. That's way more logical than a virus that they've already mentioned in the story could have any effect on the apes.
Daryl, I'm not saying that yours wouldn't make more sense. I'm saying that yours is fiction and is not in it. So as you guys can see, and that's where we're going to close it, you guys. Thank you so much for listening to me win this.
So great to have you here.
No, but seriously, you do. If and I believe that you will actually be able to purchase his Planet of the Apes comic run.
That's in print. Yeah, it's in print right now.
It's so good. We could argue more about it because it's really great, and it also tries to make all 5 of those films in the same timeline, which is not possible. Let's get to questions, shall we? Let's get to questions. I won.
Okay, Bethany, your books offer such a great commentary on society and in particular how fame and social media can affect a young person. Do you think there should be more regulations on children and teenagers' use of social media?
I don't think that anybody should be regulating what anybody else is doing unless they're their parents. Would I like to see people take those sorts of things more seriously? Yes, but I will always, because I live in this world and I see what this world does, I will be very careful before saying that something should be regulated, and that means that some third party should be making this decision. I have a 16-year-old son. He does not have social media. His phone gets put in my room before he goes to bed and stuff, and that's what we do in our house. But I'm his mom, so we have those discussions and talk about that. I've asked him recently if he wants to get on Twitter, because if you follow me on Twitter, Ezra's pretty much already on Twitter because I tweet about everything he does. But I asked him recently if he wanted to get on it, and now I think the only problem is it's become sort of a personality for him is not having. He's a contrarian like his mother, so part of his personality is that he doesn't have social media, so I don't think he's going to be getting it anytime soon. But I do think the fact that I got to be really stupid and insufferable as a teenager and nobody watched it in real time, and that's kind of what my concern is like people, not thinking through the long-term ramifications of how present kids are, and how sort of uncensored kids get to be and are on social media. I have concerns about that, but I would never want there to be sort of across the board restrictions put in place by our government or something. So.
Okay. By the way, I'll just say, as an older person, my daughter was in 7th and 8th grade when they invented social media, basically, and AOL Instant Messenger. And it was terrible as a parent because you thought you were done with school, and suddenly a whole new thing would blow up in our living room where the computer was located.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, why is she crying? What just happened?
Right.
We just finished supper.
Right. Well, and having been in those AOL, because that was me in high school is when AOL kind of chat rooms and stuff, maybe some in junior high, I can't remember. But before it was sort of, I was only friends with my friends, but then we discovered chat rooms, and that was like the Wild West. And yeah, the bullying and just all of the stuff that was happening on there that parents who this had never existed before. So it's very difficult to protect your child from something you don't fully understand, right? And I mean, we were meeting people offline after school and stuff, and there was just no concept that like in a couple short years, Dateline is going to be doing a lot of stories about this. But it was terrible, but at least it wasn't how it is now, where it's like I make a fool of myself on Twitter on like a weekly basis, but I'm an adult, right? And I could be like, oh, well, probably shouldn't have said that. But if I were a child and then I was going to get pile on of people's reactions to what I said that I didn't really think, I'm just like that seems really difficult at that developmental stage. And yeah, I just was very much did not want my son on social media.
Because A Chorus Rises was written as a response to the reaction people had, I'm being polite today, to Naima and ASPW.
Is it Steve? Did Steve write this question?
Yes, this is Steve. Did you write the story with a fervor you hadn't felt before, or was it there all along, just not necessarily in book form?
No, that's been there all along because I've been a Black girl my whole life. So the fervor definitely wasn't born with, it was more the idea that I had somehow written a story where it would be okay to demonize a teenage Black girl. So if people had been having that conversation and it didn't have to do with my book, you know, it would have just been another day ending in Y. The reason that this was such the reason it resulted in a whole book is because there seemed to be conversations where people were attributing it to me, that like, I wrote this girl as an antagonist. And I'm like, oh baby, no, that is not what happened. So it's definitely not a new fervor. It just was, you're not gonna talk about a book I wrote as though I wrote what you're saying, because I didn't.
Which scene or section brought you the most joy to write?
Everything with Courtney. every scene with Courtney, and the first family reunion scene where the chorus, because if you've read the book, you know that A Chorus Rises is actually referencing the chorus of ancestors, which is a part of the identity of being a loco that Naima wasn't previously aware of. And so that first experience of that happening and the way that it manifests and the purpose that it serves was really, I really loved writing it, because I just thought a lot about my family reunions on my dad's side. We have a very big family, and you know, we used to have talent shows and presentations and all that kind of stuff at our family reunions. And I just, you know, you just feel like embraced, you know, and it was just such a fun experience. And I loved her getting something that intimate after, you know, the sort of solitary bubble type of experience that she's accustomed to.
Are you planning to write any more books in the universe you created for A Song Below Water or A Chorus Rises?
I wasn't planning on to, so I will say that I don't plan to, but I keep getting the same request and it's kind of making me curious. I won't say it because I don't need to get it more, but maybe. I don't have any plans for it right now.
Got it. Which power, ability, skill from your books would you like to have?
I mean, I already am a siren, so it would be really helpful in a family my size if I were a loco and I could just know who everybody is, because I have first cousins and I know they're my first cousins, but I have no idea whose kid they are. And I also don't know their birth name, because and that's one thing that I put in A Chorus Rises. And I remember when my editor was like, does everybody need a nickname? Like, does everybody need multiple nicknames? And I'm like, yes, they do, because that's what family is like. So I actually have a couple of first cousins that I don't know their government name. Like I only know their nickname. And I'm too embarrassed to ask at this point because I'm in my late 30s. So.
Yeah, I have a large extended family in Tennessee, and we brought my daughter to a family reunion, and she was like 14 and hanging out with this boy, and we're like, Emma, he's your third cousin. She's like, what? I'm like, just
know that.
Just know that it's something that happens with our people. You should probably lay back though.
Wow.
Yeah, she was. Was there any music that acted as a writing soundtrack for A Chorus Rises, since music is such an important part of the book?
Yes, and you know, what was wonderful about reading the album of Dr. Morrow was that he's able, because it's set at a particular time, he's able to like talk about specific music. There's actually a lot of lyrical references that are just in dialogue and stuff. And that was so fun to read because particularly when I'm writing YA, I don't put pop culture references in, significant ones that are telling, because it's gonna date the book, of course. And I also, I'm going to be really honest, I don't know most of the music that people are listening to because I don't listen to the radio. So I just found out about a song that I like a lot, and it turns out it's old, so I won't tell you what it is. But my son is always like, yeah, Mom, that's way over. And I'm like, well, I just found out. So I always have music when I'm writing, though. And I'm trying to remember, because you have to understand, this is like 4 books ago. The music for A Chorus Rises. Okay, there's one song that I actually used for this book and the next one, and they're tonally very different, but the personality of the main characters, there's a little similarity. It's called Burnt by Kiasmos. That's the kind of music that I listen to when I'm writing. And I absolutely love it. And I think I might have listened to In Women We Trust by Teneriel a lot when I was writing it. But otherwise, it'll always be like chill step or dubstep or something like that when I'm writing. Mostly like EDM.
Yeah, you won't be surprised that I had to listen to a lot of Backstreet Boys and
Do you want me to play some right now? Because I have.
Yeah, I was like,
I can if you want to. If you want to listen to some Backstreet Boys, only Backstreet Boys. You know what I really respect? You made no mention of 98 Degrees. There is like people. He settled it. 98 Degrees did not exist. They do not come up in this book at all.
I did get to make one Menudo joke, so I was happy.
You did. I was like, I respect the Menudos in there at 98 Degrees, which was, they sort of tried to pretend they were the third runner up. And I'm like, I don't think so, guys. I don't think anybody, other than your wedding song, which they all had.
Yeah, I still wake up at night thinking, I want it that way. What is it that they want? Tell me why. It haunts me.
Listen to Incomplete. That is one of their like Renaissance like.
Oh sure, let's make that into Zen poetry. Even they admit we don't know what that song means.
It's so good. Listen to Incomplete. It's really good.
The last question is which real life boy band would the Wild Boys get along with the most? None of them. They're in competition. They're in competition with all of them. Tusk would love to sit down and have a conversation with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. That's his idol. But
the Beach Boys were mentioned also.
What's that?
The Beach Boys were. I'm trying to think of everybody that was mentioned.
Oh yeah, and Joey Fatone gets mentioned, and a few get called out by name. But yeah, Brian Wilson. Especially there's a Bare Naked Lady song called "Lying in Bed" like Brian Wilson did that I've loved for years. So. Joey, somebody said Joey.
Incomplete is amazing, Vanessa. Thank you. It's such a good song.
All right, we're out of questions, and we are 1 minute out of time. Is there everybody? I think Mysterious Galaxy will be coming back on board to wrap up. I think. Yes. But yeah, here we go. And buy all our books.
Buy all of our books, but especially please buy the Planet of the Apes comic book so that we can talk about why.
I'm so glad I can finally convince you that yes, it's one complete time. It just warms my heart that you were open to it, that you didn't shut me down and you let me speak my truth.
Because we're about to get kicked off, but I know how to contact you. Do you want to do this?
No, that email's gone now. All right.
Well, I have added Planet of the Apes to the website page, so if you wish to become informed and put your opinion in on the debate, the book is there. And speaking of opinions and social media, where can people find you so that they can continue this scintillating debate with you?
Yes, my Instagram and Twitter are the same. It's at BC Morrow, so BCMORROW.
Awesome.
I'm at Daryl Writer Guide because I was in competition with a lot of other Daryl Gregory's at the time.
Fair enough.
I'm on Twitter there. Oh, I can't even type right now because I'm looking down. But I'm barely on there. I'm barely on social media these days. I found out that it helped me write not a bit. In fact, the opposite would happen. I like being on there. I like being on there for the comedy, but it doesn't help me at all. So I had to
social
back
media
away
and
to get
mental
books
health?
done. What's that?
I have figured out a way to use it, which is I go to social media and I say, I'm not writing. Why am I not writing, guys? And then somebody's like, go write. And then it helps. Like that's like triggers me to go write. So I don't know.
You need people to dare you to write on Twitter, like to shame you.
I just get people to tell me to do things that I need to do. Like I'll say, hey guys, remind me I need to go to the post office today. And I will get about 75 reminders, which will make you go to the post office because you want to be like, okay guys, I did it. Stop talking. So
every time I say I have this painful itch, what do? I lose followers. I don't know why. And I go into great detail about it, and then
I don't know. It's like I'm just really good at it, and you're not. I don't know.
They're like, go look at creams, but we will remind you to go to the post office. And then my final question, I know that we're running out of time, but you guys are just so insanely fun to talk to. It's hard to cut off. But what are you working on, if you can tell us anything? I know that's always the big question on what can you actually, if you can share any upcoming projects with our readers.
Daryl?
Well, I've got something that's done actually. So I always hate this question because what are you working on now? It's like you're doing a new book tour and you come out, it's like coming out of the hospital with a baby and then people say, well, that's a great baby, but what baby are you working on next?
Right. Are you pregnant?
Are you pregnant yet? I'm like, I was in the hospital.
True.
So there's a novel coming out from Knopf in August called Revelator, which is Appalachian horror set in the 30s and 40s about religion and weird families, present company accepted. And there's TV stuff happening down the road, and there's other stuff happening, short stories. But I hesitate to even talk about this stuff because every time I talk about anything that's happening where it's in development, it's about to be filmed, everything falls apart immediately.
Right,
so,
of course.
In all intents and purposes, nothing is happening.
We're just here to jinx you. So the next two things that are done that I will mention because, short of an asteroid, I don't see them not happening. I have a Little Women remix coming out in September called So Many Beginnings, which I obsessively love, and so will you. And then in February, I return to adult with a social horror called Cherish Farah that I am so ready to share with everyone, but that is not next. And what I'm working on right now that could collapse is a comic book proposal that I'm extremely excited about. And I'm not asking Daryl for any advice because
it will die immediately if I even look at it. I will not gaze upon it.
No. That is not why. Just because, I'm contrarian.
And you want concise timelines.
And I don't want
sorry.
timeline juju. Yeah. On my side. She's on my side. So
Switzerland. I'm Switzerland.
Not so.
But oh my gosh, this has been such an insanely fun conversation. This is the worst part of my job, and I'm like, I don't want to end the event, but it is that time because we are at the hour mark. So I just want to thank Daryl and Bethany so much for joining us. You guys are phenomenal authors. There's a reason that we love them at the store and that their books are staff picks, guys. So I can do nothing but encourage you. The album of Dr. Morrow, A Chorus Rises, and all of their other books. Go on and check them out at the purchase book button down below. And thank you for all of the great questions and for joining us. Bethany and Daryl, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. It was so much fun.
Thanks everybody for coming. Bye, guys.
We'll see y'all next time. Goodbye.